I started the Salesman podcast. Not necessarily sales experts, but I interviewed UFC fighters, fighter pilots, special forces, kind of snipers, all kinds of crazy people. Most people don't dream of being sales professionals, right? A lot of the high-performing salespeople out there are unconsciously competent at what they do. And one thing that high-performing salespeople do is they treat it like sports. They treat it like as if they were an athlete. If you want to become a world-class athlete, you need to be disciplined, you need to be aggressive in your training, you need to recover, all these different things. Motivation is useful, but it's not what gets you long-term success.
Today we're joined by a giant in the sales space, Barron.
His podcast is the world's most downloaded sales podcast, has been awarded the title of New and Noteworthy by Apple Podcasts, and gets over 700,000 downloads a month.
Will's flagship Salesman.com Academy training program has over 2,000 students who've generated almost $1 billion in new revenue each year.
We talk about feedback loops on YouTube and social media, but when someone says you're an idiot to your face, that's a pretty quick feedback loop. Sales is tough, but for any entrepreneur, if you can do 6 to 12 months of a sales role, you are so far ahead of most of your peers who haven't done that. If you feel you can solve a problem for someone, you don't need to bully them and back them into a corner. You're guiding the person to help them make a decision as opposed to bullying them into saying yes.
In today's podcast, we cover topics such as how Will builds his 7-figure one-man business, the exact framework that Will uses to close 80% of qualified calls, the value of repurposing content, and writing a book as a marketing tool.
This is the Playstack podcast where we talk about everything YouTube B2B.
Awesome. Will, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. For the people listening, we know Will a few months now. Will, you're one of our mastermind members. And reason that we wanted to get you on is because, first of all, from our perspective, you're an ideal client, and you can go into more details. And then from YouTube business perspective, you're kind of also an ideal client in the sense that you're very similar to what Mike is doing, but just tiny bit on a different scale or a different strategy. So Will, can you tell the audience who you are and what you do?
So my background is in sales. Over in the UK, was in medical device sales for a number of years. I was always a middling performer. Medical device sales is relatively elite in the realm of B2B sales. So I was a middling performer in an elite kind of space. I had a sales trainer come in. They were terrible. It was some old dude, and he was telling me to say stuff to the surgeons that I was engaging with, that if I said it to the surgeons, I'd be thrown out of that operating room, would never be allowed in there again. This idea, this junction between kind of old school selling and the modern way of doing business was kind of really highlighted to me. So at that point, I went home, I Googled very literally how to get better at sales. It was more people who hadn't sold anything in 20, 30 years, who wrote a book 10 years ago that became popular. And it was a mess. So I started the Salesman podcast, and I started interviewing not necessarily sales experts, but I interviewed UFC fighters, fighter pilots, special forces, kind of snipers, all kinds of crazy people, Olympic athletes, to try and uncover what the fundamentals are of success in general. And then I distilled that into sales, broke it down to a bunch of series of frameworks. And that was the business for a good 7 or 8 years. It was only in the past 2 or 3 years or so that people started asking me for training. So we did some one-on-ones, then that scaled into a kind of done with you training product, which is Salesman.com Academy. We use content marketing to promote that, which is why I started following some of your content on LinkedIn, Milan. I reached out and joined the mastermind and all that good stuff. And I'm happy to sing you guys' praises, and we can get into that later on maybe. But that's how kind of we got connected, and that's what we're doing right now. So my goal this year is to get YouTube to drive traffic, drive conversions, build trust at scale, and deliver on our kind of lead generation needs.
It's interesting because you started a sales podcast, and I would have thought that you would just be kind of interviewing salespeople, because that would make sense. You kind of interviewed very successful people. I'm wondering, what skills did you find were transferable from very successful people to the kind of sales space?
So you got to remember that most people don't dream of being sales professionals, right? There's very few 12-year-olds that go around telling their friends and family and their teachers that they want to get into B2B sales. Most people fall into it. So the people who have success, it's almost luck that you get a few wins under your belt, which gives you then the motivation and the cash incentive to carry on with it. And a lot of the high-performing salespeople out there are unconsciously competent at what they do. So you could ask them, how do you have success in sales? They'd have no idea, even though they're earning $1 million a year and they're crushing it. The reason for me interviewing these other high performers is in other disparate areas is that is a lot more kind of formulaic. If you want to become a world-class athlete, you need to be disciplined, you need to be aggressive with your training, you need to recover, all these different things. And a lot of that ties into modern B2B selling. A lot of it is, and I describe it as the roller coaster of sales. And you guys probably have been through this as well. Most small business owners have, where you do well, you do some prospecting, you got some business on the go, then you do no prospecting, and then the next month it goes to crap, and then it's up and down, it's up and down. And one thing that high-performing salespeople do is they treat it like a sport. They treat it like as if they were an athlete. So they don't have these ups and downs. They prospect every day. They build a machine. I call it the lead generation machine. They know that they put 100 leads in, they're going to get 25 calls out, they're going to book so many deals on the back of it, and they refine that and improve it over time. So that's an analogy that you can pull from the Olympic athletes that I've interviewed. Of they show up every day, they don't go out drinking because that ruins them the next 3 days of performance. That's what I was trying to pull from interviewing all these people that had nothing to do with sales. Because when I did interview a few salespeople, they were like, yeah, it was just kind of a motivational kind of pep talk as opposed to anything practical. And for anyone who knows my kind of content and training, motivation is useful, but it's not what gets you long-term success. You need the discipline, the process, all the boring stuff that is, no one wants to talk about. That's really how you win kind of long-term in any business endeavor.
That's cool. Yeah, I've had a few sales jobs in a way unwillingly, and it's definitely not my thing, but one of the best experiences to get any experience in general. Like, I'll tell you a quick story. I used to be a cruise photographer. And the way we would do it is there was actually a ferry. And so every morning there would be 2,000 people coming on the boat, and they go through a little gate and we need to snap pictures. And it would be us to sell that picture to them after that. But we're in a generation where everybody's using a phone to take pictures, and we were printing pictures. And we had to sell printed pictures to people. And the kicker was 100% commission based. So I've no photography background, no sales background, had to go in and do that. And I've done it for a few months, and that was the quickest life lessons that I ever had. And nobody trained me at all. It was purely learning. And another kicker, it was in a different language. So not everybody spoke proper English either. So, sales has never been my thing. So what was that for you? Something that you fell into, or how did that go?
I wouldn't say I fell into it. I chose to throw myself into it as opposed to kind of fall into it, right? So my degree I did a degree in chemistry. I was terrible at chemistry, rubbish. So I started off doing chemistry and computer science, thinking that I would want to take the computer science side of things further, but I didn't want to be a complete nerd. So I was like, well, throw the science element of things into it as well with the chemistry. And I completely failed the first year because I failed all the computer science stuff. So then I switched to straight chemistry. And it was only my dissertation that got me over the line with my degree. And that's published, and did really well. And that was ironically a computational chemistry that my dissertation was based upon. But whilst I was going through that process, I was running a couple of tiny businesses to basically pay for my student fees and drinking money, basically partying money. And so I was importing some kind of sports products in from the US, and I was designing all the advertising that was in national magazines here in the UK. And I was by myself because I like the design element of all this and the graphic design and the marketing side of things. So I went from, and I had no real entrepreneurs in my family or close friends or any influencers from so I wasn't taught from a young age that if you create value, people will exchange cash for that. I had a natural flair for it and an interest in it, but I didn't read books. I can go on to books if you guys are interested in that in a second. That was the biggest transformation for me in my success. Just starting reading, which is crazy, right? I didn't know that pathway existed to start a business. It wasn't, and this is like pre-YouTube and pre-podcasts and all that kind of stuff as well. So you'd had to go to a library and find a book on entrepreneurship. And it's kind of a slightly different era back then. So I went from there into a sales role, and I got sacked after about 3 weeks. This was chemical sales. And I was just terrible at it, and it wasn't a good fit, and it was office-based, and it was lots of spreadsheets. And I basically got sacked because I missed a zero out on one of the kind of invoices that we sent. And this was selling precious metal to the pharmaceutical industry. So it's precious metal catalysts, so platinum and palladium. So I give them 50 grand's worth of platinum for 50 grams of palladium for $5,000. by missing that 1 0. So they honored it because it's a massive company. They didn't want to like kind of lose the business. And so very quickly I was kind of engineered out of that role. But that told me what I did like about sales, what I didn't like about it, what I liked about the numbers and the business side of things, what I didn't like. And that's when I went into the medical device sales role, where I was dealing with camera systems. So it was endoscopic camera systems. So you want to do surgery inside a patient. You don't want to tear them open to take a look inside. So you stick basically a camera on a long stick inside the patient. And I was selling all the camera systems, all the scopes. I was lots of engineering involved with it. And I had a kind of somewhat hobby that's kind of progressed now much further in I was kind of less aware that I really enjoyed it, but I was slightly into photography. So that kind of all tied together. So I got to hang out with these surgeons that were doing insane surgeries. Some of the top colorectal surgeons in the world in Bradford, which is one of my local hospitals that I spent a lot of time in, and just hanging out with them, just half selling them on stuff, half bringing toys in for them to play, taking them over to Germany to do training, bringing other people from other country, other registrars and surgeons to my surgeons to hang out and see how they're doing things. And again, made a bunch of money on the back of it, but was always kind of that middling performer, which was then the impetus to start the next thing. And that's when that entrepreneurship kind of took over. So sales is tough. But for any entrepreneur, if you can do 6 to 12 months of a sales role, you are so far ahead of most of your peers who haven't done that it's well worth taking a step back to take 15 steps forward. Helps you deal with rejection. As you will have found, it helps you communicate in a way where people want to exchange, communicate back with you. If you tell someone a bunch of nonsense, they're just going to walk off and ignore you, especially in a commission-only sales role where you literally were killing what you eat, so to speak. You either sink or swim pretty quick, and that feedback loop is so rapid. We talk about feedback loops on YouTube and social media, but when someone says you're an idiot to your face, that's a pretty quick feedback loop. Never mind, getting a comment 3 weeks after you upload a video, right?
Yeah. No, sales is crazy, and I mean, if we go into, let's say, Playstack's journey, I don't know if we touched upon this, but like Mike and I, like very little sales experience, and we dove into Playstack. And I mean, Mike eventually took over all the sales calls, but we done hundreds of them. It's been a mess.
Yeah. So I had almost no sales experience up until maybe about a year and a half ago, and then I was doing at the beginning like three sales calls a day, and then it kind of increased to sometimes 4, sometimes 5, 6, 7 sales calls a day some days. And I was doing that for about a year. It was a big learning curve because like you say, Will, some people are very, very direct. And I learned a lot, and it was like this constant feedback loop. What I'm curious about, because I've for a short period of time been on the side of the phone, if you like, where I'm selling, but I've also been on the other side where I'm being sold to. And one of my pet peeves is hard sales, where they will try to get you to pay on the call, and they will put a lot of pressure on you to try and get that. As soon as I can feel they're putting pressure on me, I just won't buy out of just principle, because I don't think that we should be making decisions under pressure like that. But it must work, right? Because that's why a lot of salespeople do sell like that. And then kind of following up on that, how do you know whether to go kind of soft sales or hard sales? Like when would you decide, okay, I'm going to go the hard sale? Because that's just not my personality, and that I would never kind of try and hard sell and push someone into a corner to try and get them to enter their credit cards while I'm on the phone, which is maybe why I'm not the best salesperson. But is there a time for that? And when is that?
There's a mindset thing to think about here, but you absolutely shouldn't bully and push someone into doing business with you, because you're just going to get a load of refunds, and you're going to get a bunch of people who aren't a good fit for your mastermind, my training program, then get good results, and then that feels spilled back onto social media, kind of poor reviews and stuff in the future. Now, there is absolutely a reason to be assertive with someone when they are a good fit and you believe that you can help them, but that's not the same as bullying someone. And I'm the same. I'll jump on calls with people. I'll jump on calls with people in the program, or I'll listen to their calls. Like part of what we do at Salesman Academy is there's an asset review section of the platform. Upload your calls, meetings, any recordings, and I personally sit and review them all. Right? You can see that when someone is, for example, asks a a cliche, old school, close-ended question like, would you like to get signed up today or tomorrow morning? As opposed to, does it make sense to get started with this? Which is the question I would ask. People's guards come up because they feel like they're being manipulated. If you feel you can solve a problem for someone, you don't need to bully them and back them into a corner. So that's the first thing. Absolutely, there's no reason to do that. It is counterintuitive. And although, yes, there is value in being assertive and communicating assertively that you can help someone and you think you can help them, you don't want to be kind of timid about that, because that then alludes to the prospect that you don't believe in what you're communicating with them, which obviously then erodes trust from the other angle. But the mindset shift to think about, to wrap your head around this so that you can be more assertive in that communication and not feel like you're bullying or pushing someone is, so I have like 4 or 5 people sign up a week for the Salesman.com Academy with our training program. And so over the course of 3 or 4 years, that's obviously hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that come through the program that I have seen their problem, I've seen the other side of it, and I've helped them navigate solving the issue. That individual may have never bought sales training in the past. So they don't know what that next step is. They don't know how much things cost. They don't know how much work they've got to put in. So if you frame it up as you're the expert, and this is, this with you guys, this is true. This is congruent. You guys are the experts. You set them, the next step of the process. Your job is to guide them along that buyer's journey until they make a decision to either work with you or not work with you. Then you've done your job. So I made notes, Mike, on our first call when we talked. When it was a sales call when you signed up to the program. I've not got them in front of me, but I could send you my kind of thoughts at some point if you like. But one of the things that you didn't do, which you should have done, in my opinion, is you left it very open-ended as to get signed up if you like. And you obviously didn't want to feel pushy, which is fine. But perhaps what you could have asked would be, hey, get signed up whenever you like. When do you think you'd be able to make a decision on this? And if they say, I don't know, then you go, no worries. And then you want to guide them. So you might say, well, most people take a couple of days to think about it. They might speak to their business partner, and then they'll come back to me. Would it make sense if I drop you an email, 2 or 3 days from now, and you can let me know if you want to get started or not? Then you're not being pushy. I call this micro closing. You've asked them an open-ended question of essentially, does it make sense to do this? If they've said no, then you ask them for guidance of, what do you think the next step is? And then you go, okay, well, if you do that, would it make sense to let me know whether you want to get started then? And you just have this loop that goes over and over and over. And this is also how you deal with objections in a more subtle way as well. Someone says, I've got no money. You go, okay, great. Well, if you had the money, would you get signed up? And they go, well, no. So then the objection probably isn't the money. There's something else there, because most people, both our products, our services are costed for a business owner or a salesperson in an absolutely appropriate way. So people will give you the objection of money when that isn't actually the objection. So you want to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you're guiding the person to help them make a decision as opposed to bullying them into saying yes.
A place that we had for the longest time, kind of like a mid-ticket offer and then a high-ticket offer. And then inevitably we had calls where they couldn't, as you mentioned, they said that they couldn't afford it. Whether they could or not, who knows? I remember reading somewhere that you should always have something to sell to them, even if they can't afford your mid or high ticket. And then we kind of put together a low ticket, which is like $500. Is that something you would advise, or would you do you have a low ticket offer, or do you just sell your one product?
One product. My whole shtick is making selling simple. So I find it really congruent on a call when someone says, oh, do you have something else, or is this or that? I go, nope, this is it. The price is the price. There's no negotiations unless it's like 100 people. Then we can talk then. If it's a big sales team. But it's just dead straightforward. And again, my goal is to help them make that decision. The less variables there are, the easier it is then, the more constraints that there are, less variables, the easier it is for them to make that decision. So I'm happy to lose business in the short term where someone goes, I can't afford it right now. Okay, great. Well, the books, Selling Made Simple and the Sales Code books are available on the website for free. There's big, thick, heavy books. There's essentially everything you need to know to find and close more deals in there. Go at it. And what most people do is, for someone to buy from you, there's usually a gap, right? It's a gap in knowledge. They've not got enough time. There's a couple of as well, but the main two are a gap in implementation, and they don't have enough time to implement it. So then most people are like, oh, it's worth X $1,000 to work with you because you'll hold my hand step by step, and then I'll be making sales is really strong ROI argument to make of spend X with me, earn Y back in the next quarter. So most people then will come back. So I'm happy to let people go rather than give them another offer, because maybe 50% of the time they come back further down the line. And I'm the only employee over at salesman.com. Got an amazing team of freelancers, but I don't have time to do 15 different products and different pathways and funnels and all that kind of stuff. I want my communication to be really simple, clear, and essentially profitable.
But do you also think that you go this strategy is because you are also a salesperson, so it makes sense to go with a very high ticket offer straight up? Like I don't even know why we went straight up high tickets and we never even thought about lower tickets. Obviously we're doing B2B. What we learned is it's been such a tough journey, and like Mike said, like if we will give you our conversion rates, like you'll laugh at it, because we just been talking to a sales team and their numbers was like, oh yeah, maybe we can do 10x of what you just said. And I was like, ooh, okay, if that would be the case, then we can actually make money. Or like,
but what's your conversion rate? Do you want to? You don't have to talk about it on the show, but maybe I can give you 2 minutes of coaching that'd be useful for other people as well. Because I'll tell you if they're bullshit or not. I'll tell you if they're being nonsense.
Yeah, I don't know, Mike. What do you think? Like, it's less than 5%. Like, we're looking at 2% or so.
I wouldn't say it was 2%. It was not that low, but definitely 5 to 10%.
Yeah, they were saying they can do to like up to 20%, 1 out of 5.
And this is on calls booked in your diary.
Yes,
yeah,
through
so
an email list.
The new system would be that we've tried different things. So we've done cold email for a long time, and that's why it's also way harder, of course, to close versus warm. But now we're going into ads, and so that's also cold in a way. But then that will be handled by others, and then also into a sales team directly.
Cool. So first thing is you guys need to get your heads together and understand the actual conversion numbers, right? That's the most important thing, because it could be 20%. If you look at qualified conversations, it might be 80%, in which case you're killing it. It might be that you're just having lots of unqualified people getting through your funnel to the point of a conversation, which is a terrible use of time for Mike. As busy as you both are, but if you're doing these calls, it's a terrible use of your time.
Yeah, we've been through that.
We've been through that.
Like just by changing copy or changing the list of like who we reach out to. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we learned that the hard way for sure.
So if you are speaking to qualified prospects, and I won't mention the price of the mastermind, but I signed up like essentially on the call with Mike. It was not a unreasonable price. I get loads of value from it. I found it really useful. So the price should not be an objection for any kind of small, medium-sized business owner. If you are converting at 10%, that should easily be 30, 40, 50%. So that then comes down to two elements. What happens pre the call? So is there a series of funnel? Is there a funnel of a series of videos? Is there testimonials? I don't want the audience to, but you can. If you book a call over at salesman.com academy, because I don't want my diary full of people just checking out my funnel and ruining me calls for the next 3 weeks. But if you guys do it, you'll see that on the homepage, there's a video. We dive into the gist of what it is. So people are informed before they even book a call. Then on the call confirmation page, there's a video that runs literally through the program and absolutely everything that's within it and explains the price. And the price comes at the end of the video. We can talk about VSL and structures if you like to build that. There's a video that alongside it of if you follow the program, most people earn this back within the kind of price of entry within the first 30 days. So for a sales training product, that's easy. It's usually 1 or 2 sales in their role that gets it, that kind of pays themselves back. The ROI is really quick. So by the time people get on a call with me, they're excited to speak to me because they've, rather than cold ads, kind of cold outbound, most of my leads come in from content marketing. So most people are, I'm a mini celebrity in the space, for whatever kind of that means. But then people are excited to speak to me. They've been through these videos. They know the gist of what they're getting. They are highly qualified. It's like 89% of people that I speak to, 89% of people will close on that call or within the next couple of days, because I will do what I suggested earlier on of if you think about it, great. And then you get a date to follow up on. So you've got the call itself, long story short, and then you've got the trust building at scale exercise before they get to the call, where at that point they're either qualified or the other aren't. You should be doing the call or you shouldn't be doing the call. And that can massively, dramatically increase your conversion rates at that point as well.
like you said, one of our biggest mistakes at the beginning was just qualifying everyone, and we was like, oh, it's just a numbers game, but it was exhausting, like really, especially because the vast majority of the calls were in the US from US prospects, and we're in Vietnam, so we was taking calls up until like 10, 11 at night, and it was pretty exhausting. But we learned.
Yeah, we learned. That was also kind of like in the beginning, we knew it was wrong in a way that we were taking calls that we shouldn't be. But it's like, I remember even the first call we had that even didn't turn out into a sales call, that turned it out into a chat with the person. He almost selling us on something probably. Like that was like, oh my God. I guess where we come from is we know what we're doing. We just don't know how to sell it to people and monetizing it properly.
But I know someone that can help with that who has a training course that kind of goes through some of these things.
Yeah, not so much time. Sorry, no money either.
So for anyone else, I'll talk to you guys about this offline kind of thing. But for anyone else who wants to, I call it a diagnosis call. What other people call it a discovery call. People put their own spin on it. But what you don't want to have is a chat and a conversation. What you want to do is what I said earlier on, which is lead the person to help them make a decision one way or another. And that's when the higher qualification you have coming in, the easier it is to lead them to making that decision. It certainly shouldn't be a chat. It should be structured. It should be documented. If you guys are looking at hiring a sales team, you guys should have the process and you're giving it to them to perhaps iterate on and improve. But most of the time, the celebs like you guys, and especially Mike with your massive YouTube channel, you will probably convert far higher if the process is right than some random salesperson who is less congruent. Even if they are absolutely just killer at sales, you should convert better than them. That's the power of your brand and the trust that's been built. So if you're looking to do all that, I'd probably encourage you guys to solve the problem before it gets outsourced and scaled.
For sure. And so when you say like you need to have control over your sales call, what makes sense? Because this is what I heard. I don't know. I never implemented it properly. Does that mean that the person needs to, the prospect needs to speak the most and you're kind of guiding the conversation instead of you having to talk? Like what's the ratio?
So Gong is a sales tool that's published loads of data on this. The problem is because one person does things one way and one market requires one thing doesn't mean that translates to everyone else. So yes, in theory, you should be asking questions, the prospect should be answering them, and that helps you then nudge, if needed, the buyer one way or another, or help them understand the problems that they have. But when we talk about controlling the conversation, it's putting up barriers either side and allowing the prospect to find their way along it, rather than putting words in their mouth. That's when the prospect will have buyer's remorse. You'll get people will want a refund, and it becomes a mess. So, for example, something that I do on all the calls and I talk about in the book is this idea of pre-framing. So, at the beginning of the call, 2 minutes of short talk, and then I'll go, okay. So the way these calls usually go is ask a few questions. We'll see if you're a good fit for what we do. If you are a good fit, I'll explain the training program, I'll answer any questions you have, and then you can let me know if you want to get started or not. Does that make sense? So you could spend a month breaking that down if you wanted to go into real nuance of it. But what you're doing is saying, this is the way these calls go. I'm the expert. I will help you go along this way. I will help you along this kind of journey of discovery to understand things. If it makes sense, I will then explain the product to you. So you're saying, well, you need to qualify yourself against my criteria before we get into the product itself. This isn't a demo that I'm just going to do with 500 random people and hope that one of them sticks. And then you say the end of this call, you set the expectations. End of this call, you're going to make a decision one way or another, and then we can both go on our merry way. And that alone stops sales calls becoming just random conversations with random people, and there's now a point to it. Because people are busy, right? You don't want to waste their time. And think of it from their perspective. If they've got a problem that they need solving, if their YouTube channel, they're spending tons of money on it, and it's just going nowhere, and they think that you can help, they want you to guide them to that understanding of whether you can help them or not as quick as possible. They don't want to do 5 calls. They might have to do 5 calls with logistics and they've got to ask questions and other things crop up, but they don't want to do 5 calls. If you're speaking with people who want to do 15 calls and have a meeting and bring in their brother-in-law to discuss things, they're not qualified to do business with you.
What would you say is your average call duration for these kind of sales calls?
And one call or two calls for your program, your academy?
So if it's an individual, a small business owner, or a individual B2B salesperson, it's always one call. I'm happy to do multiple calls if someone needs it. Maybe they've got it. Maybe they do have to go and speak to a business partner, or they have to. A lot of B2B salespeople will get funding from the company, either full or partially. So they'll go to the sales manager and they'll pitch it internally to get some of that funding. So maybe I'll jump on a call with the sales manager, who obviously has different needs and requirements for the training than the salesperson. So there's value in me having that extra conversation. My product is under $6,000 at this moment in time. And so most people can make that decision themselves pretty quickly. So it's one call, unless it's a large team. And then I do a bit more due diligence there with a larger team as well. Because again, I don't want to bring on a sales manager that's dead excited, but a really unmotivated team, because then the team's not going to perform. I'll look like an idiot. And some teams you just can't help. Terrible product, terrible market, in a lucky position where I get to pick and choose who I work with. So they might get multiple calls, but an individual, one call should be absolutely enough to help them understand if this is a good fit for them or not.
We don't do sales calls now, but when we did, this is kind of the structure that we went through. So it's relatively simple. So the first part, there were 30-minute calls generally. The first part is really just understanding the business. What are the main products? What are the main lead generation methods? That kind of thing. The second part was the problem, like digging into the problem. What was the motivation for jumping on the call? What are the bottlenecks? The third thing is, what is their desired situation? So where do they want to be in 3 months' time, in 12 months' time? The fourth part was kind of presenting the offer, link to how that offer will fix their problem. And then the fifth part was objection handling. Are there any kind of main components there that I've missed? Should I be like providing case studies, testimonials, things like that to show social proof on the sales call?
So you want to deal with the objections before the end of the call. And a good way of dealing with an objection, if you know you get the same objection every time, is to use a customer story of, people like you usually think this. So you beat them to the punch, right? People usually think this. I've just worked with someone in a similar industry who did this, and this, and they solved that issue and it never came to head. And then, you would then ask what I call a micro close of, does that make sense for you? Would that also work for you? So you want to get commitment from them that, yes, I agree that potential problem is no longer something that I need to kind of bring up. But other than that, your structure is perfect. What most people do, though, is use that structure, but they don't, and they move along horizontally, but they don't go enough vertically in the slices of it. I call it the reality gap method. So you've got the buyer's current reality, you've got the future reality, and you're the person who can bridge them from one side to the other. Maybe you can bridge from one side to the other if they're a good fit. But what you want to do is stretch these two realities out. So if someone says, yeah, I'm spending loads of time and energy on YouTube right now, it's not quite working. Or most people then leave it there. Okay, great. I found the current reality. I found the pain that they're in. Well, you want to be asking, well, what have you tried? Oh, I've tried this and this and this and this. So you're stretching the current reality from their future reality. The future reality is moving further and further away because they're telling you all these different things they've tried and it's never worked and expensive. You go, well, what's the opportunity cost of that? What could you have been spent that time and energy on? Got 3 kids. I could have been hanging out with my kids and blah, 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 blah. You just go deeper and deeper and deeper. And there's a point where it stops becoming impactful and it becomes a bit weird, right? But most people don't get anywhere near that point, right? Most people never touch the kind of, if you think of layers of an onion, most people never get kind of towards the center of it. Most people stay way too surface level. Surface level. It's something that you want to think about of, you've probably got the right horizontal across time elements in place, but how can you go deeper so that you want the buyer, by the time you turn around to them and say, I think we can help, which is what I call the value transition, then you start demoing the product or explaining how you can help. You want them to literally breathe a sigh of relief at that point. You want them to go, freaking hell, I'm so glad you can help us. And if you've not done that, and they're like, if you turn around and you go, I think we can help, and they go, oh, okay, great. There's no urgency. There's no tension. There's no sales. The selling process hasn't happened. You've just asked them a bunch of questions that they didn't care about.
So to tie everything back to what we do and what you do together, what is we do traffic, you do the closing. Can you maybe lay out your sales? Like you touched upon it a little bit, but you do a lot of content marketing, right? And like why I said earlier that you're like an ideal customer for us is because you sell coaching programs, but you also have digital products and stuff like that. And majority of your traffic comes from YouTube as well, right? Well, like, can you explain your traffic sources in a little bit and how, for example, YouTube affects your whole sales process?
Most of the clicks to book a call actually come from the podcast. But YouTube is what drives people to listen to the podcast. And the podcast is, for me, is a lot more sticky than the YouTube videos. And I describe it like this. You come home from work, you don't want to sit with your husband or wife and watch my big ugly head on your telly and watch a video on sales. You just don't. Like, I'm not offended by that. I wouldn't want to do it either. But when you're in your car on the way to work or at lunch, you might listen to it exactly the same content, but in podcast format. The numbers have died down now, but when I was doing the Salesman podcast, just and smashing the content out there, we were getting about 700,000 downloads a month. And almost everyone, so the first email on my email newsletter, when you download the book, there's a question of what's the biggest problem that you have right now? Reply to this email, let me know. And I use that for customer research. There's only like 5 things that people talk about specifically from that email. But almost everyone says, also, I really appreciate the content. I found you on YouTube, listen to the podcast. So I know that mechanism is actually there from people who I'm engaging with, going back and forth, and who end up being customers. So YouTube for me is the top of the funnel search. We talked about on group coaching calls and kind of off those as well. If I can double my YouTube traffic, I'll probably almost double revenue. So it's literally as simple as that. Obviously, the problem is sales is as much as I want to make it as thrilling. It's there's only so much you can do with it, right?
Yeah, but the crazy thing with you is your YouTube, what is, let's say, then top of the funnel, you're getting 500 to 1,000 views per video. And that turns into a 7-figure business. What is like, and that's what a lot of people are missing out here is like, hey, but we want to have like viral videos and stuff. It's like, well, it's not the point. And so to recap, it's like you have top of the funnel, your value providing educational videos on YouTube. That's how people usually find you because of search. Then they'll listen more to you on the podcast. And what's from there? Like they get the book, they sign up for your email newsletter. What's the story from there?
So there are 4 elements, I guess, but they're all one opt-in. You all go to the kind of like same platform that we've built, right? So there's the Seller Made Simple book, which is everything you need to know to build the sales process. There's the Sales Code book, which is everything you need to know to become the person to implement the process. And the Sales Code book was built on data from our Sales Code assessment. So we've had 20,000 salespeople and small business owners go through the assessment now. So I reverse engineer all the data from there to find out. We look at people who hit quota, who surpass quota, what traits do they have that other people don't. The 4th element that people opt into is a community. So you can go in, ask your questions. And I spend an hour in there every morning, go and answer people's questions and building that little bit of rapport with them there. And the point of all that is, I think I touched on this earlier on, was that is absolutely everything you need to know to go and find and close more deals. It's all there. And my premise is I want to give, and this isn't right for everyone or all businesses, but I want to give absolutely everything away and become so known in the space as the person who helps other people win, that when people do have a good quarter and they want to buy sales training, I become a no-brainer to work with. Or people go through the book. So the books, both of them are like, this sounds simple, the other one's over there, but they're like 400 pages thick, right? And I add to these all the time. Or almost every quarter, there's another 20, 30. I can only go up to 500 pages and then the printers can't print anymore. So I'm going to have to start culling them shortly. But I'm constantly adding to them. So there's just so much there. It becomes almost overwhelming. And then people book a call of, okay, can you shortcut this process? Help me implement it and get it done. And the first part of our training program is your training page with all the different workshops gets personalized based on the assessment they do when people come in. So again, to double down on that value proposition of the minimum amount of training to get the most impact out of their results. So the whole funnel is built on the premise of I make selling simple, but then I make it more difficult, and then you pay me to make it simple again. So it's kind of a wave in the middle of complexity.
Yeah, that's kind of our idea as well with the mastermind and the accelerator, where first we explain what's needed to be done, then you need help to get it done, or help, like we hold your hand to do it. And then then you understand how much is needed to be doing it. And then it's like, hey, we can do it for you. Awesome. I actually already learned a lot, and I don't even think we dug deep into anything sales yet. So maybe we should do a part 2, 3, and 4.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Will, for joining us. What's next for you, and where can people find you?
What's next for me? You guys have probably found this interesting. So I'll wrap it up quickly, but all the content from the books gets reverse engineered into the YouTube videos, and the podcast and all that side of things. So when I write new content, it gets repurposed multiple times. So I'm working on a third book called Scaling Sales right now. So the first book is building the sales machine. The next is what I call the meat machine, which is you as a person to implement it. The third is building the scaling machine so that once you've got a process that works and you tap out your own productivity, you can then implement other ways of scaling, whether it be AI, whether it be kind of software tools, outsourcing, all that kind of stuff to scale further. So that's what I'm working on next. And anyone who wants to find out more about what I do, just head over to salesman.com or search for us on YouTube and subscribe and check out the content on there.
It's actually a really good point because as Milan and I are content creators and we think about repurposing a lot, but the way that we repurpose is we start with like a YouTube video and then we make shorts, then we make LinkedIn posts. But the way that you repurpose is you write an entire book and then you can essentially make almost infinite repurposing from there, which is quite smart.
Who's the guy who does like Ali Abdel does this a bit? There's another dude who's more famous for it. It was like, I forget the name of it now because they all brand it differently. It's the same thing, but it's essentially like you'll know this, Mike, for sure. But it's like your brain on a computer, and it's all your thoughts, and you link them all together with hyperlinks or whatever it is. I did that and got all the content, all the blog posts that I've ever done, and it basically was a book. So I was like, oh, the book's done. But then I was like, well, why don't, as you just described, why don't I build something that hopefully has tremendous value to my audience, and then scale outwards from it? Because I was sick of creating a YouTube video, repurposing it, and then it was dead. And I'd create another YouTube video, repurposing it, it was dead. I was like, how can I go one level higher and build almost like a live, these three, I won't write, there'll never be more than 3 books, probably. But right now, there'll never be more than 3 books. That should be everything that you need to know to win in sales. And so if you start at that high level, you've then got that asset that you can go through for the next 20 years, as opposed to, I found I was getting not burnt out or anything like that, but I was finding it really monotonous to do the podcast and to do this. And I felt like I was starting from scratch every single week. So that's why I went that level deeper to do the books, then kind of systematizing the whole process, and everything that I do is in step-by-step frameworks. By doing that, it became a much stronger starting point for everything else to kind of trickle down from. And, the shorts are bits from the book. The emails and the email list are bits from the shorts. They get repurposed as emails. So once I tried to go that one level higher than what I think most people do, which they create one piece of content and do the Gary Vaynerchuk of creating 5,000 bits from it. I tried to go that one step higher and kind of reverse engineer, real success for kind of my students.
Reminds me much of Daniel Priestley, how he has his, 5 books now. And if you start from his first book and then you go up, it's literally like the entrepreneur journey. And I just love his books. And then whatever content he creates around it. Like every time you hear Daniel Priestley go on a podcast as well, it's the same talk, but he just implements that into the situation of the host or whatever it is. Like one of my favorite one of Daniel Priestley is the one on Ali Abdal Deep Dive, where they literally start a fake business and start working that out on the process. And so what I'm hearing and seeing with you now is you're going through that same process, and then after your third book, maybe a fourth or not, but your next thing would be probably a software tool that can help with sales or something like that. So you have your things sorted out. That's super exciting.
Cool. Daniel Priestley is a perfect example of that. I've not read his books in years, but his first book was for an individual. Then it was like the assets you need to build. So, and he's scaling, and because the assets book, then he built the software tool to do his quizzes and stuff on the back of it. So he writes a book to market the business. So my business isn't changing, and it, if I could print 2,000 pages in one book, it would just be one book. But it's not dissimilar to what I'm in.
That's literally what he also is teaching. Like you need to write a book. Like
he sells that. That's step one of his kind of sales funnel.
Exactly.
You need to become known. Write a book, then you talk about the book on a podcast. And you create shorts from the podcast clips, and then obviously
I told Mike this when I read the book. I was like, Mike, I need to write a book, because Mike is trying to write one, but he's kind of postponing it now. But I was like, Mike, I need to write a book. I was like, why would you read it? Like, what would you write a book about? I was like, I don't know. We'll figure it out. But yeah.
Well,
no,
that's what I did though. I started with a bunch of blog posts. They became the framework of a book, and I hired a writer to write the blog post. I wasn't writing them. I just given bullet points, probably similar to you guys and how other people use script writers. You're communicating what you want to communicate, but you might have them flesh out the in-betweens, and you go back add another layer of value to it. I had a series of blog posts, they all tied together. That then became the book, which then became the training product. The training product is just the book, but me going through it and helping kind of step by step. So that it all came from one thing. Now, if you write the wrong book, you've just wasted 5 years of your life, and it's been a complete kind of disaster. So that's the flip side of this. I'm not encouraging everyone to write a book, but when you know what your buyer wants and you are happy to commit to that marketplace for the next 5 to 10 years, the book is a great kind of a process to marketing tool to bring it all together.
Okay, cool. Well, Will, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I truly enjoyed it. I don't know how optimized it is for an audience to listen to this, but it felt more like like something for us. But I guess it's applicable for a lot of people. And I will probably see you one of the weeks on one of our mastermind calls as well then.
Cool. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, Will.